Hey there, I'm Keanu. Today I'm here to share something a little different with you, a journey that started with noise, failure, and the endless search for peace. For a long time, I thought peace was something you had to chase, something earned after you fixed everything that was broken. But life had other plans. What I discovered instead was that peace isn't hiding somewhere out there. It's been waiting quietly in the space between all the noise, between every breath, every thought, every choice. So, if your mind's been running faster than your life, if you've been chasing stillness and keep missing it, stay with me. This story might help you find what's been within reach all along. Part 1, the paradox of peace. Stop chasing, start finding. What if peace isn't something you win by trying harder, but something that walks towards you the moment you stop running? There was a season when my mind felt like a snow globe in the hands of a restless child, forever shaken, never settling. I chased quiet the way people chase promotion or praise, as if it were an achievement I could notch on my belt. So I booked the perfect cure, a meditation retreat, high in the mountains, where the air is thin, and the silence is supposed to be thick enough to tame even the loudest inner roommate. Everything looked right, pines tracing the sky, a meditation hall washed in morning gold, a teacher with the kind of voice that made you feel both seen and forgiven. Let your mind settle, he said. Settle? Mine roared. I sat on the cushion and discovered that trying to be peaceful is just another way of trying to control life. The more I gripped for stillness, the louder the storm clattered in the glass. I walked out feeling like I had failed at the simplest human task. Sit, breathe, be. On the ride home, the city swallowed the horizon, and traffic braided into its usual puzzle. Then it happened. A pickup lurched into my lane without warning. My handlebars jittered. The world kinked sideways. For a breath, I thought this might be the last line of my story. And in that hairline crack between fear and whatever would come next, there was space. Not blankness, not numbness. Something open, steady, unstartled, like a lake that somehow remembers how to be calm, even while the wind shouts at it. I pulled to the curb, set a foot down, and just sat. No technique, no mantra. The space had been there all along. I had simply been too busy hunting to notice the deer standing in the clearing. That moment rearranged the furniture of my mind. I realized I had treated peace like a distant country, something to reach by purchasing a ticket, mastering a method, reaching a threshold of good enough. But peace didn't live at the end of a staircase. It lived in a landing, the landing between steps, between inhale and exhale, between the urge and the act, between the story my fear tells and the choice I make anyway. After that, I began to look for the landing. The city offered me hundreds. Red lights, doorways, the instant before I answered a text, the tilt of someone's eyes just before they spoke. Once you start noticing, it's everywhere, thin seams, stitched through the day, strong enough to hold the heart. Of course, I didn't turn into a saint of serenity overnight. I still had triggers. I still mistook velocity for vitality. But I had touched the edge of something unlosable, and it had a simple logic. The harder I tried to capture peace, the more it sprinted. The more I relaxed my grip, the more it reached for my hand. If you've ever felt like your thoughts are running a marathon you never signed up for, borrow this experiment. When the next wave rises, annoyance, fear, urgency, do nothing for 3 breaths. Not 5 minutes. 3 breaths. Feel the body breathe itself. Watch the spark that wants to leap. Let it land first. In that pause, notice how choices reappear, how the world widens by a few degrees. Peace doesn't arrive with trumpets. It slips between the frames and waits to be recognized. That day, standing beside my bike, the city moving past in its indifferent rush, I realized I hadn't failed the retreat. I had misunderstood the assignment. Peace wasn't a prize for being a better meditator. It was the practice of finding the hinge, the quiet that opens whenever life closes in. And that's where our journey begins. If part 1 reveals the paradox, stop chasing, start finding, part 2 hands you the first fiercest tool, the 3-second pause that turns reactivity into real power. If you've ever hit send too soon, spoken too sharp, or let someone else's chaos rent space in your head, don't miss part 2. In the next chapter, we'll step into the space between trigger and response and learn how 3 seconds can change an entire day and eventually your life. Keep watching. Part 2, the power of the pause. 3 seconds to real freedom. 3 seconds is shorter than a sentence, yet long enough to rewrite your story. Before I learned the pause, My emotions drove, and my judgment rode shotgun. Someone cut me off, I cut back. A rude email arrived, I sharpened my reply. I mistook speed for strength, retaliation for relief. The road proved me wrong. Another day, another lane change without a signal. The old script loaded. Heat in the chest, jaw tight, mind writing speeches it would never deliver well. Then part 1 tapped me on the shoulder. Find the landing. I counted 3 breaths. 1 to feel the surge. 1 to soften the grip. 1 to choose. By the 3rd breath the question surfaced, react or respond. I didn't chase the truck. I reclaimed the wheel. That's the power of the pause. You cannot control traffic, markets, weather, other people's moods. But there is one square of ground, nothing can seize the interval between what happens and what you do about it. The Stoics understood this. They trained not for the absence of storms, but for the presence of steering. Our freedom is not in the outer event, it's in the inner option set. The pause is where options multiply. People hear pause and imagine becoming wooden or numb. That's not the work. I call it friendly indifference. A warm willingness to let things be what they are without letting them decide what you are. Like holding a small bird firm enough to keep it safe, gentle enough to let it fly. You hold your anger that way. Your fear, your hunger to clap back. You say, I see you, and then you ask, now, what serves? Here's the training protocol that actually fits in real life. Rule of 3 breaths. Before you reply to a text, email, or slight 3 conscious breaths. No exceptions when you're heated. Especially then. 2-minute reality check. Ask, can anything I do in the next 2 minutes truly change this situation? If not, I do not spend 2 hours rehearsing it in my head. Label the moment. This is a trigger. Naming is taming. Accuracy dilutes urgency. Move the body. A single step back from your desk, a shoulder roll, a sip of water. Physical micro-movement anchors the pause in flesh, not just in thought. The remarkable thing isn't that it works once. It's that it compounds. Every time you choose the pause, the nervous system learns a new rhythm. The space widens. The default shifts. You stop living at the mercy of other people's starter's pistol. You stop outsourcing your peace to strangers with bad manners. Do I do it perfectly? Not remotely. I still have days I blast through the yellow light in my chest and only realize it at the emotional crash site. That's okay. The practice is not perfection, it's quicker return. The moment you notice you've left the space, you're already back in it. There's a hidden dividend to the pause I didn't expect. It begins to open a larger space, not just between trigger and response, but between past and future. When you stop lunging at the next move, you notice the present has edges that can be leaned into. Time stops feeling like a conveyor belt and starts feeling like a room with windows you can open, which is exactly where part 3 begins. If your life feels like a highlight reel of almost moments, almost present at the birthday, almost listening to your partner, almost enjoying the view, part 3 is your turning point. Keep going, and I'll show you how to stop missing your own life by stepping fully into the only place it happens. Now, part 3, don't miss your own birthday. Returning to the present. The past is a museum, the future a sketch, but your life is being painted in this very stroke. My 50th should have been easy joy. Stories braided with laughter, wax softening on the cake, faces I loved, gathered like lanterns around a table. I was there in body and nowhere else. While friends toasted, I replayed yesterday's awkward sentence and pre-lived next week's meeting. I floated above the room, a ghost in my own celebration. Later a friend said, gently, you missed your whole birthday. He was right. I had become an expert in times that do not exist. The pause from part 2 had opened a door. Stepping through required a second choice: inhabit the room you're already in. The ancient teachers drew the map in a single line. Real life is in the present. Everything else is memory or imagination. When you actually arrive, something wild happens to time. It doesn't speed up. It deepens. A single minute has more width. I started practicing arrivals. Nothing dramatic. Just micro rituals that pull the mind back into the body where life is actually happening. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Grounding. 5 things I can see: light on the glass, blue of the mug. 4, I can hear air vents, a distant dog. 3, I can feel feet on floor, fabric on wrist, breath in belly. 2, I can smell. 1, I can taste. 90 seconds. and I'm back in the only country with citizens, the present. 3 breath thresholds. Before any transition, standing up, opening a door, answering a call, I take 3 intentional breaths. Transitions used to be trapdoors where attention fell through. Now they're gates I pass through awake. Whole body listening. In conversation, I stop composing my reply while the other person speaks. Eyes soft, shoulders down, attention like a steady lamp. People bloom under attention, so do relationships. Even the road changed. Riding became less about getting somewhere and more about being somewhere. Wind combing the sleeves, the hum under my hands, the city unscrolling. I didn't become a monk. I became porous to the ordinary miracle of being here. Presence doesn't exile past and future. It recruits them. Memory becomes wisdom applied to this choice. Planning becomes clarity about what matters now. But to stay present, I had to befriend something I'd spent years resisting: impermanence. The instant you land in the moment, you feel its edges changing. A heartbeat later, the light is different, the face across from you a hair older, the breath already departing. That used to terrify me. So, I clutched. I tried to freeze the good, outrun the bad, hold the river still. That illusion cracked the day I stood behind a chain-link fence and watched a backhoe bite into my childhood home. My knuckles went white on the wire as if squeezing could reverse time. It couldn't. Letting go of the fence, I felt something else loosen, the belief that stability is the same thing as sameness. It isn't. Stability is being rooted in what doesn't need to move, values, attention, presence, while allowing everything that must move to move. Here's a simple liturgy that changed my mornings. I pick up something I love, a chipped cup, a leaf on the sill, and whisper, "This too shall pass." Not to summon sadness, but to juice the sweetness. Knowing that everything goes makes every this glow. Another phrase became a bridge over contradiction. Both, and, asterisk. This is hard and temporary. I'm sad, and I trust my feet to learn this new ground. Asterisk. When you stop arguing with the weather, you have energy to walk in it. Presence, I learned, is not a mood, it's a muscle. It gets stronger when you use it. Miss a rep? Fine. The beauty of the present is that it's always newly available. Every breath is a reset button you carry everywhere. Part 1 taught me to stop chasing peace and find the space. Part 2 taught me to protect that space with a 3-second pause. Part 3 teaches me to live inside the space, to let birthdays be birthdays, conversations be sanctuaries, errands be prayers dressed in errands. And as you stand more often in the now, you'll notice the river of change is always moving past your ankles. You don't have to dam it. You can learn its rhythm. In Part 4, we'll step straight into impermanence, how to be the rock and the river at once so that change stops stealing your balance and starts shaping your strength. If you're ready to stop fighting the tide and start surfing it, keep watching. Part 4, The Rock and the River. I didn't learn impermanence from a book. I learned it with my fingers curled white around a chain-link fence while a backhoe took the first bite out of my childhood home. The sound was a kind of metal thunder, a jaw chewing through years. I stood there with the logic of a child: if I just hold tight enough, maybe the past will reconsider, and of course it didn't. The wall gave way in a spray of dust and memory, and I understood in my bones what my mind had argued with for years. Life does not ask permission to change. I drove there sometimes just to look, to test whether the place still held me like a pressed leaf inside a book. It had, until it didn't. In the hole where the kitchen used to be, I could still picture my mother's hands over the sink, the evening light hovering in the window like a patient bird. But even the ghost of that light was learning new angles, new surfaces. Condos would grow there. Strangers would argue over paint chips in rooms where my brother and I once measured our height on the doorframe. In some other life, I would have written a letter to the developer, a petition, anything to keep the blueprint of my mind intact. Instead, I let the fence cool the heat in my palms and watched the machine do what it was designed to do: make way. I thought letting go would feel like loss, a subtraction with nothing on the other side. What surprised me was the strange exhale that followed, an untying in the chest. The sense that I had been carrying bricks labeled how it was supposed to be, and setting them down finally made my legs remember how to walk. I had been enshrining old versions of myself the same way jobs finished long ago, identities that no longer fit but still felt holy because they had once saved me. The house helped me see the pattern. I had confused stability with sameness, and because sameness cannot survive, I mistook every change for a threat instead of a teacher. The paradox is that I didn't become unmoored when I stopped fighting change. I became steadier. I started thinking of myself as a rock in a river, not a boulder trying to block the current, just a presence that allows water to be water while refusing to forget its own shape. The river will touch you, wear you, shine you, but the rock does not apologize for being rock. That was the lesson I kept walking into. I could be faithful to my principles while letting circumstances do what circumstances do. The more I practiced it, the more life felt like a choreography I was finally learning, not a stampede I had to outrun. There were moments, of course, that still pried under the skin. The box of unsent letters I discovered in a closet when I moved. The jacket that belonged to a friend who is no longer here to wear it. Change has teeth. Pretending it doesn't only makes the bite worse. So I made a quiet ritual out of greeting it. In the morning, I'd lift a mug, feel the familiar chip on the rim, and whisper, "This too will pass." People imagine that sentence makes the world gray. It didn't. It amplified the colors. When you know the lemon tree behind the fence won't be your neighbor forever, you taste its shade more deeply. When you understand that the laugh across the table is already vanishing into the air, you linger in the warmth it leaves. It helped to stop forcing decisions into either or boxes. I used to believe strength meant refusing sadness, that optimism and grief were rival teams. The river taught me otherwise. I could admit I was scared and still go. I could say this is difficult, and at the same time, this difficulty will not last. Holding both truths widened the room. There, in the room, the present grew more trustworthy. I didn't need to catalog every variable to step forward. I needed only to trust the step. One afternoon I walked past a park where a child was learning to ride a bicycle. The father didn't hold the bike forever. He ran beside it, breath loud, hand open just behind the seat, and then he let go. The child wobbled like a thought at dawn, then found the line where fear and balance kiss. The world looked the same, but it wasn't. Something irreversible had occurred. I realized that's what life had been doing with me, running at my shoulder for years, laughing, encouraging, and then releasing its grip when I least wanted it to. The wobble wasn't a failure. It was the ceremony of becoming. If part 1 taught me to stop chasing peace and part 2 taught me to guard the pause, if part 3 invited me to live inside the present, then part 4 braided them together into a posture. Trust change without surrendering your shape. I am not the house that fell. I am the human who watched and softened around the truth that all houses fall eventually, even the ones we build in the mind. The point is not to keep the roof. It is to keep the hearth alive wherever we stand. I walked away from the fence that day lighter than I arrived. Dust in my hair, a sense that even the air prefers to move. In the movement, there is a kind of fidelity. Everything changes. Yes. But something in us learns to stay, the attention, the willingness, the hand we extend to ourselves when the next wall comes down. That hand is what I reach for next. Because if the river is always moving, then the real work is not to freeze it, but to discover who watches the water pass without drowning. That discovery began with a review I didn't want to read, and a voice I thought was mine. Part 5, You Are Not the Storm, Becoming the Sky That Holds It. The review arrived on a Wednesday, like most small devastations do, no preface. Just a blunt subject line and paragraphs that knew exactly where to land their punches. I had performed the week before and walked off stage with the warm illusion that I had done something decent. The critic disagreed. He found the soft spots, the places I'd rushed, the gesture I returned to one time too many. At first I told myself I was only going to skim, to harvest whatever notes might be useful. 2 minutes later I was drowning in a monologue that didn't belong to the page at all. "They're right," it said. "You're a fraud. You've been dressing incompetence as charm for years." The words wore my voice and borrowed my memories as evidence. It felt airtight. I have known anger that burns clean and passes. This was not that. This was a weather system that parked over the house. The room dimmed. The future folded its arms and turned away. I sat at the edge of the bed and watched the part of me that had always wanted to be undeniable shrink to something I could hide in my pocket. If someone had asked me to describe myself in that hour, I would have said I was failure shaped like a person. Then the strangest interruption. A question. Not loud. Just persistent enough to knock on the door of the trance. Who is listening? It didn't arrive like triumph. It arrived like curiosity, a child tugging at a sleeve. I didn't have an answer, so I let the question keep me company. Who is listening? If there is a voice, there must be an ear. If there is weather, there must be a sky. The thought was small and stubborn and, as it turned out, a key. The moment I looked for the listener, Something in me stepped back half a pace and found a floor I hadn't known was there. The floor was not an argument against the critic. It was not a shield or a counterpunch. It was simply space, the spaciousness that had touched me on the road now widening around the storm in my head. The sentences didn't stop marching. They just lost their power to conscript me. I could hear them without becoming them. A sparrow knocked once against the window, a tiny sound that cut through the static, and I realized the room was still here. The afternoon light was still working its quiet mathematics on the wall. The world hadn't collapsed, only my identification had. I began to test the edges of this new room. When the inner prosecutor raised another exhibit, "Remember that time you choked in the meeting?" I nodded. The way you nod when a child insists the moon is following the car. Sure, I'm not arguing with the moon. I'm also not letting it drive. I noticed that when I named the weather, this is a squall of self-judgment, a low-pressure system of old shame. It softened by a few degrees. Not because the pattern was false, but because the sky refused to forget itself. What surprised me next was how the body cooperated. A 10 count before replying to the email that demanded a defense. The shoulders relaxing as if they had been waiting for permission. A hand over the belly to feel the breath find its way home. The critic inside and the critic on the page were both still talking, but they were talking to a person who had access to a window. I cracked it open. Air is a kind of teacher. It carries the unarguable message that life continues. None of this made me indifferent to feedback. In fact, the opposite happened. From the sky, I could finally tell which clouds held clean water and which were just noise. I revised the piece based on the useful notes. I let the rest pass through. The miracle was not that I became bulletproof. It was that I stopped confusing my reflection in someone else's lens with my face. That humility, the honest one, the kind that doesn't kneel to cruelty, felt like a sturdier kind of confidence than the brittle bravado I had worn before. I didn't need to be extraordinary to be allowed to stay. I needed only to remember the watcher and return. The return became a habit. When I caught my mind fastening onto a fear, I would ask again, who is listening? Sometimes the answer was just the feeling of awareness itself, no words. Only the sensation of standing at a quiet distance from the noise and watching its choreography with a patience I didn't know I had. On other days, I spoke to the storm, the way you speak to a well-meaning friend who has the wrong address. I know you're trying to protect me. I've got it from here. The friend would grumble, maybe pace the porch, then wander off in search of a doorbell to ring. I didn't follow. You might think that stepping back would make life gray, as if detachment were a color that washes everything to neutral. For me, it did the reverse. Colors sharpened because I wasn't viewing them through a fog of self-story. The coffee tasted like coffee, not like an argument about productivity. A friend's laughter sounded like weather I wanted to stand in. Work became simpler when it was no longer an audition for my right to exist. I did what needed doing, rested when rest was due, and if a storm formed, I welcomed it the way sailors read the sky, not as an omen, but as information. By the time the next review came, and it did, and it was kinder, I had stopped using external weather to forecast the climate of my worth. Some days the forecast is still wrong. I wake into a squall and forget everything. Then the question arrives like a lighthouse through rain, and I see enough to steer. That is all this part of the journey asks. Not that we master the atmosphere, only that we remember we are not it. Which carried me, almost inevitably, to the room where I kept another kind of weather altogether, the garage, where I went to be alone with a story I told about freedom. The story was chrome. It was leather and long roads, and a person I hoped I was when the engine opened its throat. 16 machines waited in a row like a chorus line. I loved them. I also realized, standing among their gleam, that love had turned into something else, something heavier. The sky cleared enough for me to see the shape of more, and it startled me into the next decision. Part 6, enough learning the weight and the lightness. The garage had become a museum with a generous curator. 16 motorcycles slept under their covers like large, domesticated animals. Some wore the dust of long naps. Others kept their shine the way some people keep secrets. I used to come in here for solace, to run a cloth over a fender and imagine the road unspooling under a sky that said yes. That afternoon, the cloth drooped in my hand and I saw it. Not a collection of rides, but a collection of identities. Freedom in duplicate. Adventure in triplicate. Narratives with engines. I don't know what made me stay still long enough to hear the click. Maybe it was the accumulating practice from parts 1 through 5. The space, the pause, the present, the river, the sky. Something nudged me to let the labels sit in silence until their adhesive loosened. When it did, what waited underneath wasn't condemnation. It was the simplest question I had avoided because it sounded too obvious to be profound. What if you already have enough? Not an accusation, not a vow of poverty, just an inquiry precise enough to pierce the trance of accumulation. What if you already are enough? I sat on a milk crate and let the engines breathe the faint perfume of old gasoline. I thought about why I bought the 15th bike when the 14th still made me grin. I remembered the thrill of the auction countdown, the way the brain translates novelty into oxygen. I remembered the ache that returned a week later, the itch for the next click, the next chase. It wasn't greed in the cartoon sense. It was hunger misdirected, a tenderness toward possibility that kept mistaking objects for open sky. The bikes hadn't failed me. My story had, so I tried a different story on. The way you shrug into a jacket you're not sure fits yet. I asked what the day would feel like if nothing new was required for it to be meaningful. The answer didn't arrive in trumpets. It arrived in textures. The grip of a familiar handle. The roughness of a callus I'd earned fixing something instead of replacing it. The way sunlight pooled on the concrete and traveled almost imperceptibly toward the kickstands. Enoughness, it turned out, was less a number and more a posture, shoulders lowered, breath unhurried, attention released from its leash. You learn quickly that the opposite of excess is not deprivation, it's intimacy. When you stop reaching outward, you begin reaching into the life you already occupy. I went for a ride on the bike that had carried me across the mountains the summer I needed proof that I could finish something. It started on the first ask, as if relieved to be chosen not from novelty but from affection. I noticed sounds I'd forgotten, the thread of the chain under acceleration, the low vowel of the engine at 30 miles an hour, the way wind decides which part of your jacket to press and which to leave to its own folds. It felt like drinking water after weeks of chasing stronger flavors. That sense of intimacy spread in directions I hadn't planned. A pot on the stove reclaimed its right to be interesting. A conversation with a neighbor lived longer in my chest than any unboxing ever had. Work refined itself. I stopped scattering my attention like seed on concrete and started planting it in fewer, truer plots. Mornings I asked what single act would make the day worthwhile if everything else slipped its schedule. Sometimes the answer was a piece of writing. Sometimes a call I had delayed because it mattered. Sometimes it was doing the dishes with music loud enough to make steam look like a dancer. There were temptations, of course. Sales litter the path of the restless, and my inbox knows where the cavities are. I would feel the old itch and watch it with the kind of smile you give a friend who insists dessert is not optional. Sometimes I said yes on purpose. Sometimes I let the moment pass, and marveled at how quickly the craving folded like a tent when the wind died. Restraint stopped feeling like a clenched fist and started feeling like an open palm set gently over the heart, a promise that I wouldn't barter away my finite attention for a 3-day shipping confirmation. Giving things away startled me with its specific joy, not as penance, not as an aesthetic of purity, but as a correction to gravity. The second helmet went to a kid who'd been saving up for one with summer money that kept evaporating into family needs. The touring bike that fit me less well after a shoulder injury found its shape under an old friend who'd been pretending he was done with long roads. Objects want to be used, and letting them move where they could be themselves again taught me that mine is often a temporary condition. The space left behind wasn't empty. It was possibility. Empty shelves can be altars if you let them. Enoughness altered how I measured wealth. Time thickened. Attention unstolen, unshredded became currency. I noticed that people who feel seen leave conversations taller. I noticed how a quiet room can rescue a tired mind faster than a weekend in a louder place. I noticed the way no can be a door that keeps a home warm, and how boundaries, far from imprisoning, lengthen the horizon because they give a self something to walk from and toward. Friends worried I'd turned ascetic. I hadn't. I had turned attentive. The motorcycles didn't vanish. Their meaning did, and in the void left by the old meanings, better ones took root. I still ride. I still love the way a road can teach you the grammar of a curve. But I no longer confuse quantity with permission to be alive. The present grants that permission one breath at a time. Everything extra is garnish I enjoy when it comes and forget when it goes. Of all the changes, the most unexpected was the way enoughness bent me outward. When you're no longer busy auditioning for your own approval, you have surplus to spend on other people. Not the performative kind, the selfie with a stranger's need, but the quiet, unphotographed exchanges that stitch a day together. The man by the restaurant door, the one I almost walked past because my head was arguing with a calendar, became a person again when my attention wasn't mortgaged to scarcity. We spoke. I listened. We both left larger. That's the thread that will carry us into what comes next. Peace found me in the pause. Presence taught me to inhabit time. Impermanence showed me how to keep my shape while the river moves. The sky reminded me not to mistake storms for self. Enoughness softened my grip on the props. With my hands finally free, I can use them for what hands are best at helping. In the next part, we'll walk through the door that opens when your attention is no longer for sale, service that doesn't keep score, and connection that doesn't clutch. If peace has a public face, it looks like that. Part 7, the door that opens outward. The evening, I almost missed the man by the restaurant door. My mind was auditioning for a role it had played too often. The overburdened strategist, rehearsing arguments with tomorrow. It was the kind of quiet that isn't quiet at all. Sirens far off, cutlery murmuring through the window, a city hurrying itself toward the next appointment. I had one hand on my keys and the other on my phone, already halfway to the car that would swallow me into the private weather of worry. He spoke softly, almost as though testing whether the world still answered when he called. I didn't hear the words first. I heard the humanity in them. The same human timbre I hear in myself when I'm asking for what feels impossible. I should tell you I was noble. The truth is less cinematic. Something from part 6 tugged at my sleeve. Enough. When you already have enough, your attention is not rented out to the future's what-ifs. It can afford generosity in the present. So, I stopped. I put the phone in my pocket like a little ceremony and lifted my eyes. He was older than me. The years written in the kind of shorthand only the body knows. Weathered hands. A posture that had learned humility the hard way. Eyes that still stored a little light. We talked. Not long, 10 minutes if you timed it on paper, an hour if you measured it by weight. He told me about a daughter in another city. About jobs that disappeared like lakes in drought. About a pair of boots that used to be better until the edges came apart. He had a laugh that sounded like a stubborn ember. When it caught, everything brighter in its radius tried to remember how to be warm. I offered what I could that evening. Food, yes, a little cash, but mostly a kind of attention that doesn't look past a person to whatever you've decided to call real life. He didn't stop needing after that conversation. I didn't stop worrying forever. What changed was the calibration of importance. My problems, heavy a minute before, became specific and solvable when they shrank back to their true size. His life took a seat at my table. Mine made room. I carried the quiet from our talk with me into the car like a second passenger. It didn't argue. It didn't flatter. It simply settled over the dashboard and suggested there are forms of usefulness that don't announce themselves. I had always thought service was a posture of draining, pouring yourself out until you were a husk. That night taught me a different arithmetic. Pouring makes more water somehow. Not in some cosmic karma trade give and the universe gives back, but in the way attention changes the one who gives it. I left feeling larger, not because I had been thanked, but because the membrane separating me from us had thinned to transparency. Marcus was right. What brings no benefit to the hive brings none to the bee. We are either part of the circulation or we are suffocating without noticing. I started testing this in small, unphotographed ways, the kind that never get the headlines we write for ourselves. A cashier's name said aloud with the kind of eye contact that says I see you, not just your role. A car invited into my lane like a guest instead of an enemy. 5 minutes on the phone with someone who needed to say the same sentence 3 times until it stopped shaking. I didn't turn into a saint. I turned into a person who understood that usefulness is a cure for certain kinds of loneliness, that the body was built to be a bridge more than a bunker. Here's what surprised me most. Service loosened my grip on outcomes. I used to offer help like a contract with clauses. If I give this, you will feel that. If I share this, the future will unfold in this prescribed gentleness. But life owes no one a script. I began to practice holding lightly and caring deeply at once, the art of pouring fully without insisting on the shape of the cup that receives. There's a strange liberation in that. Love becomes less of a ledger and more of an atmosphere. You live inside it rather than trying to spend it into the right corners. Sometimes I failed in loud ways. I offered advice when what was needed was silence. I tried to repair what wasn't broken because the brokenness made me feel useful. I apologized more as the year went on. I also learned to ask better questions. What would actually help is a humbling sentence. So do you want company or a solution? People told me the answer, and when they did, my hands found where to be. There is a version of this story where I start a foundation and gather data and change the shape of cities. Maybe that belongs to someone else's life. Mine felt more like planting herb gardens in cracks of concrete. Do one anonymous kindness a day, I told myself. Leave the world 1 degree warmer than you found it. It sounded like a child's assignment until I noticed the ripples to the edge of the pond. I didn't see the ripples themselves. I saw their proof. How I walked into rooms less armored. How I was more honest about my needs when I'd spent the morning meeting someone else's. How my days stopped feeling like an audition and more like a shared rehearsal. When you become part of the circulation, you can't help noticing another truth moving beneath everything, one current that runs under service and enoughness and presence and the pause. The current has a name we whisper like a superstition and pretend we don't hear. Death. I avoided the word the way drivers avoid looking over cliff edges. But you cannot serve well if you do not understand time. You cannot call any moment sacred until you admit its scarcity. The road would teach me the lesson in a language my body could not misunderstand. Mulholland. A blind corner. A car in my lane and the universe expanding inside a few seconds until it found the size of meaning. That is where the story goes next. Part 8. Borrowed light. Memento mori on Mulholland. The hill road curled like a question. The air had that late afternoon clarity that makes the world look as though someone quietly cleaned every edge while you weren't watching. I wasn't running from anything. For once, I wasn't running toward anything either. The engine made its reliable vow beneath me. The hands found their old friendship with the bars. If you've ever had a day when your life agrees with itself, you know the feel. Nothing fancy, just an internal nod. Then a car appeared in the question mark, answering the wrong way. It swung wide into my lane around a blind corner, a white flash of metal and decision. The moment did the thing moments do when they become more than moments. It unfolded like a map. Sound thinned, details thickened. I could tell you the exact slope of the driver's eyebrows, the way sunlight printed a rectangle on the asphalt just ahead, the scatter of gravel like pale constellations. There was fear, yes, but it didn't foaming cap the whole ocean. It felt bracketed by something steady that had been practicing for me all along. In that bracket, the same space that had saved me on the city street when the truck cut me off, the space the pause was training me to find my life's priorities, rose like buoys in a harbor. Not the resume lines, not the arguments, not the last review. A face. Another face. A morning making coffee while watching a bird land and leave, as if the branch were a sentence and the bird the necessary comma. I thought of the man by the restaurant door and his ember laugh. I thought of my own foolish, tender attempts to love the world correctly for once. Then the moment collapsed back into human size. I braked. The car corrected. We both lived. The road kept its secret. I pulled to the shoulder and let the engine's heat write its signature into the air. People talk about near death like a sermon. Mine felt less like a lecture and more like a confession. I had been spending my days like a millionaire who refuses to look at the account balance because he's sure it is infinite. The ledger is not infinite. Every morning deposits a fixed sum, and even if you don't check, the withdrawals happen. We know this. We don't live as though we do. The Stoics had a phrase for the medicine. Memento mori, remember that you will die. Not as glamour, not as melancholy, but as instruction. If everything is borrowed, treat it like borrowed light. On the shoulder, I performed the simplest inventory I've ever taken. What would matter if the car had not moved? Would anyone care that I won the argument? Would I nurse the grudge, like a pet I'm secretly ashamed of? Would I have wished I'd bought bike number 17? Or would I have wanted one more hour of easy talk in a kitchen with someone I love, elbows on the table, time gusting through the curtains like a polite guest? The answer was plain enough to change me. Not in a fireworks way, in a subtraction. I began saying no to certain kinds of noise the way you say no to a second drink when you want to remember the evening. I didn't stop planning. Planning is love in advance, a way of laying breadcrumbs for your future self. But I planned like a person who had checked the balance. I asked each day a blunt question at night. If this were the last, was I here for it? Did I show up like a participant rather than a reviewer behind glass? Did I widen anyone's air? Did I notice the planet's daily miracles, the crimson bravado of a sunset, the humble holiness of hot water? For a while everything felt newly gilded. Colors went louder, Food tasted like it owed no apology to any other meal. Laughter took up more space in my chest. Then the glimmer dulled, as glimmers do. Habits make valets of even our most sacred vows. So I put rituals in place that refused to let the vow vanish. A stone in a pocket, thumbed whenever I caught myself living as though my life were an endless aisle of options. A few words scratched each evening about where I'd made contact with the world and where I'd escaped it. A practice of looking at photographs of people I love who are no longer here and then calling someone who still is. Memento mori did not make me morbid. It made me merciful toward others. Because everyone you meet is carrying the same secret you are. The sand is falling, and none of us gets to halt the glass. Toward myself, because perfection is a vanity project with poor returns. Toward time, because squeezing it makes it leak faster, holding it open lets it breathe. I went back to Mulholland a week later and parked at the Overlook, where the city throws its jewelry across the dark. It is a view that never apologizes for being extravagant. I took my helmet off and stood there, bareheaded before the proof of human audacity and error, beauty and blunder all glittering as one organism. Somewhere down there, someone was being born. Somewhere, someone was letting go. I had been both and would be both again, and in between I had another unknown sum of mornings to spend. I wanted to spend them like a person who knew the price and the worth were not the same calculation. If part 7 opened the door outward and part 8 turned the lights to their proper brightness, what remained was to stitch the map away to walk the city with this knowledge inside the souls. The pieces I'd gathered: the paradox of peace, the pause, presence, impermanence, the sky of awareness, enoughness, service. Memento mori felt less like chapters and more like rooms in one house. Part 9 would be about learning to live there not as a guest, but as the person whose name is on the deed. Part 9. The one-room house stitching the map. After Mulholland, the practices stopped feeling like discrete drills and more like furniture I moved within a single room. The room had windows on all sides and a front door that opened onto the street where everything unpredictable happens. If I listened, the room taught its own grammar. Mornings began with the paradox from part 1. Stop chasing. Instead of lunging into the day like an ambulance, I sat with the kind of quiet that doesn't perform itself. No candles, no music, just a chair by a window and the company of breathing. Not as a contest. As a reunion. A neighbor's dog would announce its opinion about a passing squirrel. The kettle would clear its throat. The hum of the refrigerator laid down a bass line. I didn't scold thoughts for arriving. I let them take a number. By the time I stood, the pause from part 2 had already set the metronome. Traffic anxiety surfaced. I found the landing 3 breaths that remembered the body belongs in time, not ahead of it. An email arrived with the kind of tone that pretends urgency is virtue. I felt for my keys old reflex, then for the space new reflex, and answered with a clarity that didn't need to be cruel to be firm. It shocked me how often 3 seconds transform the shape of a conversation. You move one piece on the board, slowly, and change the endgame. Presence from part 3 became less of an achievement and more of a noticing. Doors turned to bells. Crossing a threshold meant a micro-arrive. Hand on the knob, inhale, exhale, look. It made me a better host in my own life. Friends commented they felt received, not just scheduled. I started noticing details that used to skitter past: how a friend always traces the rim of her glass when she's about to say something brave. The way a certain street smells like bread at 4 in the afternoon. When I missed the present and found myself rehearsing a future, I didn't prosecute. I simply stepped back onto the stage and took my mark. Impermanence from part 4 stopped being an abstract principle I admired and became a tool I used. Plans changed because they do, and instead of filing a grievance with reality, I said what I'd promised to say. Hello, teacher, what are you here to show me? Sometimes the lesson was patience. Sometimes it was the silliness of my own expectations. Sometimes it was an invitation I wouldn't have recognized if the original plan had held. I kept the sentence both, and in my pocket like a talisman. I would finger it when the day tried to force me to choose, grief or gratitude, fear or movement, letting go or holding value. The river and the rock can keep each other honest. From part 5, the sky practice meant storms didn't own the roof. A thought would arrive dressed as law. I would meet it like weather, curious, courteous, not fooled. When self-judgment sidled up with a spreadsheet of mistakes, I walked it to the window and showed it the large world. Sometimes we forget that the world is larger than any sentence in our head. The window remembers. When criticism, mine or someone else's, offered something true, I wrote it down with the dignity it deserved and didn't let it rewrite my name. Enoughness from part 6 adapted my appetite. I sifted my days for density rather than volume. One good paragraph outweighed a morning of frantic drafting. One slow meal with a friend outlived 3 networking coffees that tasted like performance. Objects continued to be beautiful. They just stopped applying for the job of making me whole. The garage, echoing slightly emptier, felt like a chapel. Service from part 7 spread its quiet net through the week. I built us time into a calendar that had once been a monument to me. Not as an overlay real life plus charity, but as an interwoven textile. On days I forgot, life reminded me in small, comic ways. A stranger wrestling a stroller at a door I could have opened had I been looking. A friend's voice gone unusually flat on the phone because I was waiting for my turn to be interesting. Love is often a manual task. It uses hands. Memento mori from part 8 didn't haunt the corners. It perfumed them. It kept the room honest. When I was tempted to turn the day into an endless rehearsal for a performance no one would ever attend, I felt for the stone in my pocket and remembered the show is tonight. I delivered the lines I had, even if the script felt unfinished. Most scripts do. That's part of the charm of being here. We are all improvising in a play about being mortal and trying not to waste it. In that one-room house, I started to see how the 7 doors I had been naming were really one door seen from different angles. The hinge was attention. The knob was willingness. The lock, when there was one, was fear disguised as cleverness. The key was so simple, it embarrassed me to admit it out loud. Stop, notice, choose. Stop the sprint you weren't aware you were running. Notice what's real where you are. Choose an alignment with the person you keep hoping you'll be later. I wish I could tell you this architecture saved me from every storm thereafter. It didn't. The world continued its faithful work of being itself beautiful, indifferent, tender, brutal, mundane, extraordinary. I still forgot, because forgetting is part of being human, sometimes the most human part. But the house made return easier. I didn't have to rebuild the walls each time. I only had to come home. There was one more move to make, though. To speak this house aloud so others could find it for themselves. Not as doctrine, but as an invitation to look for their own windows and doors. That work would become part 10, not a conclusion exactly, more like a vow written near the back of a map, the place where you scribble reminders to your future self about why the journey is worth the blister. Part 10, the vow in the margin. I write this last part the way you sign your name after a long letter you hope the reader will keep folded in the back pocket. The handwriting isn't calligraphic, the pledge is. It begins in the same place where part 1 began, in a nervous system that once believed peace was a prize, and ends where part 9 leaves us in a one-room house with windows on every side. If you've stayed with me, you know the route wasn't linear. Rivers rarely are. But by now you can see the current's shape. What I'm vowing is not to be a different person tomorrow. That promise breaks by breakfast. I'm vowing to keep choosing the small, durable moves that make a life not the movie version, the human one. I will stop, as often as I remember, before I am swept into a reflex that does not serve. I will notice with the kind of kindness that doesn't coddle, but refuses to humiliate. I will choose in the direction of the person I would be proud to be on the last day I'm allowed. Some days, the vow will look like interruptions. A hand on a doorknob that becomes a bell. 3 breaths between the text that stings and the reply that would stain. Calling a friend instead of calling up 100 old stories about not being understood. Thanking water out loud because sometimes gratitude needs a mouth to exit and re-enter as air. Other days the vow will look like refusal. Refusing to purchase a new object to rescue me from a feeling I can survive. Refusing to rehearse a grievance that rots whatever bowl it sits in. Refusing to outsource my worth to people who haven't been tasked with guarding it. The refusals aren't asceticism. They are straight lines drawn through noise so the music can step forward. There will be days when grief arrives with its suitcase. When it does, I will make up the guest room and let it stay until it has finished teaching. I will not pretend grief is a stranger or an enemy. I will feed it soup and water and sunlight until it remembers it is part of love's anatomy, not love's failure. The house we built together has room for that. It has room for laughter too, the kind that takes both hands to hold because it's slippery and holy and might jump the fence if you don't pay attention. I will keep making mistakes with my whole heart. The half-hearted ones waste time. The wholehearted ones teach quickly. When I hurt someone, I will say so without adding a thesis about why it made sense at the time. When someone offers me an honest mirror, I will stand in it long enough to see my outline and not long enough to forget I am more than an outline. When the inner prosecutor shuffles his papers to remind me of the case against me, I will walk him to the window. The city will be busy being alive. I will point at it and say, look, and seated. I will treat attention like wealth and spend it on what multiplies when given away. Tenderness, courage, craft, friendship, the slow workmanship of a day well used. I will stop giving attention to what prints only counterfeit bills. Manufactured urgency, spectacle masquerading as meaning, the hypnotic trance of more, when what I want is depth. I will make of my attention a lantern, not a searchlight hunting for enemies. I will serve in ways that don't require applause. The applause, if it comes, can be for the fact of being here together at all. Everybody improvising as kindly as they can. I will let people help me. Refusing help is a pride disguised as stoicism, and I've already seen what pride buys, loneliness on sale. I will ask, what would help, and answer it when others ask me. I will remember that usefulness is a love language. I will say the old Latin to myself without drama and with great affection, Memento mori. I will let it make my coffee taste like a ceremony instead of a caffeine strategy. I will let it make sunsets slightly ridiculous and entirely necessary. I will write the names of people I love as if I am writing them for the last time, and then I will write them again tomorrow because we got another day we weren't owed. If I am lucky, the vow will become muscle memory. If I am forgetful, which I will be, the vow will be written where I can't misplace it. On doorknobs and teacups, in the arc of a passing truck that chooses not to hit me. In the pause, my body knows how to make even when my mind doesn't. In the laugh of a man outside a restaurant who reminded me that my attention belongs to the present by default, to rehearsals only by habit. You don't need my story to keep yours. You don't need my house when you can build one that fits your weather, your windows. But if you wanted a map, if you needed proof that someone else found a way to live without turning away, then let this be that. Not a system. Systems forget to be human, but a set of handrails you can reach for on the stairs when the lights flicker. Peace is not a finish line. It is the name of the room we return to when we stop pretending there is somewhere else we are meant to be. So, if you've read this far, consider this your invitation and your inheritance. The paradox that frees you from chasing. The pause that returns your power. The present that invites you home. The river that refuses to drown your stone. The sky that doesn't collapse because a storm has manners. The enough that loosens the belt on your appetite. The service that excites the lungs. The memory of death that makes every minute radiate. The house that gathers them, the vow that keeps them close. When the world knocks, and it always will open the door. Stand in your one room, look through a window, then go outside and live as if you mean it. Thank you for staying with me until the end of this video. If any part of this story made you pause even for a moment, I hope you keep that pause with you. Because that tiny space between what happens and how you respond, between the past and what's next, that's where peace actually lives. Remember, you don't have to chase it anymore. Just stop, breathe, notice, and you'll realize it never left. I'm Keanu, and I'll see you in the next one. Until then, take care of your breath, your thoughts, and the quiet between them.